high likelihood of recession, but was not at all sensationalistic, who by the end of 2008 is saying, I think there's a 1 in 4 chance that we're going to have a replay of the Great Depression. I mean, that was really out there. It wasn't just coming from the actors involved. It was coming from economists who were, not directly involved in deciding where the money would go. Now, I know, there is that perception out there. I got tons of emails from people while I was writing stories about the crisis saying, if you would just stop saying that things are so bad, people would be scared, and then everyone would feel fine, and then there wouldn't be a crisis. But we don't do outcome-based journalism. At least we try really hard not to. So it's a tough one. There's a feeling out there that it's almost as if we in the press were complicit in something akin to the press coverage in the run-up to the Iraq War, where we were fanning the flames of there was terrible reporting. Everybody knows this. We've talked about it. It's been acknowledged. There was terrible reporting. Particularly in the paper I write for now, in the run-up to the Iraq War. But there was a clearly defined piece of information that you either had or you didn't. Did Saddam Hussein have weapons of mass destruction? However you feel about what we should have done or shouldn't have done, that's a yes or no question that on some level can be answered. It turns out he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. What would have happened if we hadn't bailed out large financial firms in 2008? Who knows? That's not a yes or no question. It depends. It depends on what the markets think the risk is. It depends on what people who have money ultimately do, presented with the policy options that you pursue. So, I was always cognizant, through that period, that I had to be real careful that I not sensationalize and that I not, needlessly fan the flames of fear. But I couldn't sit there and say, well, I'm not going to print what these economists are telling me because I'm concerned about the outcome. That's no different than my saying, I really think we should go into Iraq, so I'm going to, doctor the reporting I'm doing on the intel. You just got to go with the facts and hope that works out better, for everybody. Yeah.
What would be the cost, I guess, in terms of deficit or political cost of bringing what you said is happening in Iowa or North Carolina to scale on a really large level?
What would be the costs?
Yeah, like how big would that have to be, or how much would Obama have to push? How hard would that be?
Well, this is an area where Obama actually has spent a good deal of money. I can't remember what the numbers are. I think the Department of Energy got like $4 billion to do renewable energy. I've heard criticism, even from people close to the White House, as they say, that we should be doing more. And the financial crisis hit a lot of the investment that was going into things like wind farms, and there's a fear that if we don't move fast to lock up some of this manufacturing and then to get into the innovation that could potentially give us some real value going forward, then we're going to wake up and discover that all the solar panels and wind turbines are made in China, in Europe. So, if you're asking for an actual number, I have no idea. But clearly, we could be doing more. We could be moving faster, and there is a shortage of capital that we could be addressing.
I have a question about the economics profession. Like we have an economics department here, and I assume a lot of the students taking courses. Yet, we actually don't see our economists show up when we have events where anything is political, because that's not economics.
Right.
So I wonder, has there been any rethinking, or you get a sense of it from your reporting, that the entire economics profession and how they've trained a generation of students is also somewhat to blame for?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a lot of soul searching on this front. Paul Krugman wrote a big piece in the New York Times Magazine that looked at how the economics profession had failed and how there was in fact a rethinking about just the basic assumptions of economics, not least being the idea that the market is always rational. And so whatever price the market is setting for an asset, whether it's a house or a share of stock in a company that you've never heard of and that's never sold any product for any money at all, that somehow that reflects, the rational determination based on supply and demand. That is, very much being rethought, and Keynes is back. I mean, John Maynard Keynes, who counseled coming out of the Great Depression that when demand in the economy is weak, the government has to step in and substitute for that demand. This was the basis of the stimulus spending, the idea that the government steps in and unleashes money, and that money cycles through the economy, and that creates demand for concrete if the government steps in to build a road, or workers at a turbine plant if suddenly there's money that goes into building out the electrical grid such that it's easier for wind power to move through the system. So that's, certainly Keynes is now back in a way in which had not been the case all through the 80s when Milton Friedman was the economist of the moment.
But if it's true, you say Keynes is back, it doesn't seem like it from the way these issues are still discussed in Washington. I mean, the opponents label everything socialism or Marxism or worse. And the administration talks about the deficit, and the president says that it's quite all right to make as much money as possible at AIG or whatever. So there seems to be a disconnect with some of the things the administration is doing and how they talk about what they're doing.
Yeah, the political system is so different now. And I think it's worth remembering that when Roosevelt was first elected in 1932, to the degree to which there were pundits in that day, there was an actual open discussion about, does the United States need a dictator? And would it be helpful to have, a clear central authority? Or think about the experience of China, taking advantage of a centrally planned economy. And I'm not sitting here endorsing, I'm not suggesting that we should have a dictator or we should have a centrally planned economy, but if that's what you got, it sure is helpful to be able to just decree, we're going to have a $586 billion stimulus spending plan with no debate, no, Congress deliberating, no Fox News calling you a commie, for doing that. That doesn't happen in China. And the money goes out the door. A lot of jobs are saved quickly. And in our system today, the idea that anybody could have openly said in 2008, well, let's have a dictator, which was a real debate in 1932. It's just a very, very different political system. But again, I think that it was, just within the confines of what we're dealing with today, I think it was a real tactical error for the administration to start talking about the deficit. And at the time I thought, well, this is a signal to China in particular, don't worry, we know we have to do the stimulus spending and that's going to add to our deficit, but we're going to get a handle on this going forward. But that changed the political dynamic. In early 2009, I think it would have been pretty easy for the president to say, okay, here's the deal. I inherited a great big deficit. And I got this deficit from the last administration. They ran the Iraq war off budget. They handed out tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. And by the way, the biggest component of the increase in the deficit is the recession itself. So I've taken office with this big, nasty deficit. Is the deficit bad? Yes, the deficit's really bad. We're going to have to get a handle on it, but there are no good options on the menu. And now we're going to have to invest aggressively so we can get out of this. But by introducing the concept of deficit reduction, this came out of the president's mouth. That then allowed the opposition to play gotcha. So then everything he proposed, from should we have more stimulus, to what should we do to help homeowners who are threatened with foreclosure, to what's the cost of healthcare reform going to be in the immediate years, everything got processed through this filter of, well, what about the deficit? And if the answer is it's deficit positive, if it increases the deficit in the short term, then it's a political non-starter. And so yeah, it's true. Keynes is back in terms of the general philosophy. In terms of the thrust of the the abstract debate. But in terms of the real policy, it does, Larry Summers is still here. And Larry Summers is a deficit hawk. And I guess I've come around to the view that it's not really tactics. This president has surrounded himself by people who are career deficit hawks. That's who they really are.